I gave my entire life to people who told me they loved me. I built their dreams, carried their burdens, and trusted every promise they made. But one day, standing in my own living room, I realized something that shattered me. My only son and his wife weren't caring for me. They were studying me. Every forgetful moment, every sigh, every misplaced key, became evidence in their quiet plan to steal everything I owned. They thought age had made me weak. They didn't know I had spent 40 years mastering numbers, patterns, and lies. And the one thing I never forgot. Hi, my name is Evelyn Harper, and I'm 71 years old. For most of my life, people have described me as reliable. The kind of woman who pays her bills early, remembers every birthday, and keeps her kitchen floor so clean you could eat off it. Numbers have always made sense to me. People? Not so much. I grew up believing that if you worked hard, told the truth, and saved every dollar, life would reward you with peace. I was wrong. For 20 years I worked as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm in downtown Portland. My late husband, Martin, ran a small home repair business that everyone in Maplewood trusted. Together, we built a modest life, 2 cars, a paid-off mortgage, and enough savings to retire without worry. When Martin passed away 6 years ago, I thought grief was the worst thing a person could feel. I didn't know that betrayal could hurt deeper, because betrayal wears the face of someone you raised. After the funeral, my son Nicholas started visiting more often. His voice softened, his hugs grew longer, and he began every sentence with "Mom, don't worry about a thing." At first, I believed him. I wanted to. He had married Vanessa, a bright, social young woman who worked in marketing and posted family photos online like we were the perfect suburban dream. They invited me to move into their large Maplewood home, until you feel like yourself again. I told them I was fine. I had my own place, the duplex Martin and I had bought years ago as an investment. But Vanessa insisted, smiling in that sweet, polished way that never quite reached her eyes. "Evelyn, you shouldn't be alone at your age. We have plenty of space. It'll be good for all of us." I remember standing in their living room the day I moved in. My boxes looked small against their designer furniture. The air smelled like expensive candles and quiet judgment. The first few weeks felt harmless enough. Vanessa cooked elaborate dinners and complimented my casseroles like she was humoring a child. Nicholas managed my mail, so you don't have to stress, and one day I noticed my checkbook had disappeared from my purse. When I asked about it, Nicholas said, "Mom, you gave it to me, remember? You said keeping track of bills was too much now." I didn't remember that conversation because it never happened. But arguing made me feel petty, so I let it go. That was my first mistake. It started subtly, the patronizing tone, the whispered laughter when I repeated myself, the way Vanessa filmed me with her phone when I misplaced my reading glasses. "Just documenting the cute moments," she said with a grin. But I saw the way she labeled the video file on her laptop, "Memory Episode, February 17th. At dinner, they'd exchange glances every time I forgot a word. "Mom, you meant Wednesday, right? Not Tuesday." Nicholas would say loudly, as if training a child. Soon, I wasn't allowed to drive for safety reasons. My doctor appointments were rescheduled without my knowledge. My financial statements started arriving at Nicholas's address. I was being erased, quietly, efficiently, and legally. The day I realized what was truly happening was ordinary, which somehow made it worse. Nicholas was at work, and Vanessa had left for her Pilates class. I was cleaning the kitchen when I found a stack of papers tucked beneath the fruit bowl. Legal documents printed on thick paper, still smelling of toner. At the top, in bold letters, "Power of Attorney, Evelyn Harper." My signature was there. My handwriting, but not mine. My hands went cold. The pages blurred. Someone had forged my name, authorizing Nicholas and Vanessa to manage my assets, property, and medical decisions. They hadn't just stolen my checkbook. They'd stolen my identity. I remember sitting down on the cold tile floor, staring at the papers until the letters stopped moving. For a long time, I couldn't cry. Couldn't even breathe. All I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the whisper of my husband's voice in my memory. Evie, never sign anything you don't understand. When I finally stood, I wasn't the fragile widow they thought they were controlling. I was the woman who had audited corrupt companies for 2 decades, who knew how to follow a paper trail until it screamed. That night, I created a folder on my laptop named Recipes. Inside it, I stored scanned copies of every suspicious document I could find. I photographed mail envelopes, bank transfers, and utility bills that didn't belong to me. Then I downloaded a voice recording app. The next morning, when Nicholas began another speech about protecting my future, I tapped record in my pocket. "Mom, you need structure," he said, pouring coffee like he was hosting a meeting. "And maybe professional care. You've been forgetful." "I'm not forgetful," I answered. "I'm careful." He smiled tightly. "Of course you are." They didn't notice the red light blinking beneath the tablecloth. I didn't sleep much after that. Every night, I'd back up the recordings on a hidden flash drive and keep it beneath my pillow. Every morning, I'd smile at them like nothing had changed. They thought I was breaking down. In truth, I was preparing for war. And I didn't plan to lose. They say evil rarely arrives in thunder. It seeps in quietly, like water through a crack in the ceiling. That's exactly how it felt living under Nicholas and Vanessa's roof. Nothing sudden, nothing loud, just a slow, constant erosion of dignity. Every morning began the same. Vanessa would glide into the kitchen in her silk robe, holding her phone like it was glued to her hand. "Morning, Evelyn. Did you sleep okay?" She'd chirp, without looking at me. Then, while I brewed my coffee, she'd open the blinds a little too fast and sigh, "Oh dear, you forgot to close these again last night. You really shouldn't stay up so late. It's not good for your memory." That word, memory, became her favorite knife. Nicholas, meanwhile, had perfected his role as the patient, overworked son. "Mom, you know we're just trying to help," he'd say whenever I asked for access to my own mail. "Bills and paperwork are complicated. You don't need that stress." Stress. Another word they loved. Everything I wanted to do, drive, cook, even garden, was too stressful. Soon, the only thing I was allowed to handle was folding laundry. The first major red flag came one Friday evening. Nicholas arrived home early, his tie loosened, his smile unusually wide. "Mom," he began, sitting across from me, "Vanessa and I have been thinking. You've done so much for us, it's time we take care of you." It sounded kind. Until he slid a sleek folder across the table. Inside were forms labeled Living Trust Agreement and Asset Reassignment Authorization. I looked at him. "You want me to transfer ownership of the duplex?" "Just temporarily," he said quickly. "For tax purposes. It'll make things easier if something happens to you." "Something like what?" He hesitated, then smiled the way people do when they're lying but think they're clever. "You know, just in case your health declines." That night, I tore up the documents. I didn't sign a thing. But the next morning, Vanessa was waiting in the kitchen, pretending to scroll through her phone. "Mom," she said softly, "Nick told me you were confused last night. You thought he wanted your house. That's so silly." Her tone was sugary, but her eyes were sharp. "I wasn't confused," I replied. She smiled wider. "Of course not. But still, maybe you should let us handle these adult things." Adult things. As if I were a child. Within weeks, the manipulation grew into routine humiliation. If I misplaced my keys, Vanessa would whisper, "It's okay, she forgets things." If I double-checked a bill, Nicholas would chuckle, "She's always been paranoid about numbers." Sometimes I caught them whispering in the living room, only to go silent when I entered. And when I'd ask what they were talking about, Vanessa would tap her temple and murmur, "Just planning ahead." The cruelest moments came during family gatherings. At Thanksgiving, when their friends came over, Vanessa made a joke about my cute obsession with balancing checkbooks. "She still keeps everything written by hand," she laughed. "Isn't that adorable?" Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. I sat there with my polite smile, feeling the heat rise behind my ribs. I wanted to shout, "I'm not senile, I'm precise." But I stayed quiet. Because the quieter I stayed, the more they revealed. A few days later, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Nicholas was on the phone in his office, door half open. "Yeah, my mother's losing it fast," he was saying. "Doctor's notes should be ready soon. Once that's filed, we can move forward with the guardianship petition." Guardianship. The word hit me like a gunshot. That was their plan, to have me declared legally incompetent so they could take everything. My house. My savings. My freedom. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from gasping. The irony wasn't lost on me. They wanted to prove I was unfit, yet they were the ones plotting fraud in broad daylight. That night, I began logging everything. Dates of unusual withdrawals from my account. Times Vanessa helped with mail that never reached me. The exact words Nicholas used when he spoke to lawyers on the phone. Each note went into a leather-bound journal I'd labeled budget notes, something Vanessa would never bother to open. But what truly solidified my suspicion came a week later when I found a new email on my laptop. It wasn't from me, it was to me. Sent from Nicholas's work address. It read, "Mom, this is just a reminder to bring your driver's license and social security card to our meeting with the financial advisor next Thursday. He'll help with the trust papers." I hadn't scheduled any meeting. When I confronted him, Nicholas didn't even flinch. "Oh, that's just a routine thing," he said. "For the records." That night, I forwarded the email to my old friend Clara Stone, the one person I trusted. She had once been a paralegal at my firm before becoming a licensed attorney. Her reply came within minutes. "Evelyn, don't go to that meeting. Call me tomorrow. I think I know what they're doing." For the first time in months, I felt something fierce awaken inside me, an ember of the woman I used to be. When Vanessa knocked on my door the next morning and asked, "Are you excited for Thursday?" I smiled sweetly and said, "Oh yes. I'm counting down the days." Because now, so was I. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't come from being alone. It comes from being surrounded by people who've already decided you don't matter. That's what my days began to feel like in Nicholas and Vanessa's house. A quiet, invisible kind of suffocation. The gaslighting became constant. Little moments, so small they could almost pass as kindness if you weren't paying attention. But I was. If I misremembered a grocery item, Vanessa would touch my arm gently and say, "It's okay, Evelyn. Happens to all of us when we get older." If I double-checked a bank statement, Nicholas would sigh, "Mom, you're overthinking again. You've always been anxious about money." It wasn't just what they said, it was how they said it. Every sentence came coated in sugar and poison. They began controlling my environment too. The TV remote vanished for days at a time. The landline phone stopped working. My cell phone password mysteriously changed. When I asked about it, Nicholas chuckled. "Mom, maybe you typed it wrong. You've been mixing up numbers lately." Numbers. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so cruel. I'd spent 40 years in accounting, my entire life built around precision, and now my own son was using that against me. The world outside their house grew smaller. I stopped hearing from my neighbors in the duplex because Vanessa had helpfully forwarded my mail. My old friends left voicemail messages I never received. When I finally asked about it, Vanessa smiled. "Oh honey, you didn't check the shared family inbox. Nick said you wanted us to screen your calls." I hadn't said that. I hadn't said half the things they were now claiming I'd said. They managed my prescriptions too. "You can't mix these, Mom," Nicholas warned as he handed me my pill organizer one morning. "Doctor's orders." I didn't remember the doctor ever saying that. But I nodded anyway. It was easier than fighting. That's how control works. It doesn't demand submission. It makes you choose silence because silence feels safer. The walls began to feel closer each week. The house was big, 2 floors, vaulted ceilings, bright open windows, but somehow it felt smaller than a prison cell. I wasn't allowed to go for walks alone because you might get dizzy. I wasn't trusted to cook dinner because you could forget the stove. The kitchen that once felt like mine now belonged to Vanessa's obsession with spotless perfection. Every time I entered, she'd follow behind me, rearranging whatever I touched. Once, I made tea for myself, poured a cup, and forgot the spoon on the counter. Vanessa appeared seconds later. "You forgot to stir your tea again," she said softly, lifting her phone just enough for me to notice she was recording. "Why are you filming me?" I asked. "For your safety," she replied. "In case you have another episode." Episode. That word sliced through me. That night, when they both went to bed, I sat in the dark living room staring at my reflection in the window. My face looked tired, smaller somehow, like the life was slowly draining out of me. I whispered to myself, "You're not crazy, Evelyn. They're making you look crazy." I thought of Clara and the email she'd sent. She had said she knew what they were doing. I couldn't risk calling her from the house phone, so I slipped outside into the garage where the Wi-Fi didn't reach and dialed her number from an old flip phone I kept hidden in a toolbox. "Evelyn," she answered, her voice calm but sharp. "Are you safe?" "For now," I said. "I've seen this before," Clara told me. "They're setting up a conservatorship case. They want to prove you're incompetent so they can take legal control over your assets. You need to start documenting everything." I almost laughed. "I already am." She paused. "Good. Keep your head down. Don't let them know you're on to them. I'll start pulling property records and financial filings from the county office." Before hanging up, she added, "And Evelyn, don't doubt yourself. They'll try to make you feel insane. That's their weapon." The next few weeks were a quiet war. Every day I collected evidence while pretending to lose my mind. I kept a small notebook tucked inside a hollowed-out cookbook in the kitchen, Maplewood family recipes. Inside, I recorded dates, times, and everything they said to me. Vanessa filmed me today again, pretending I forgot my keys. Labeled the file forgetfulmom_3-22. Nick withdrew $2,400 from joint account. Reason, home repairs. No repairs done. They had turned my home into a case study. I was turning it into a case file. One morning, I overheard Vanessa on the phone. "She's worse this week," she was saying. "Sometimes she doesn't even know what day it is. If we can get Dr. Mills to write the statement by Friday, Nick can file before the hearing." Dr. Mills, my physician. My heart sank. They were using my doctor too. That evening, I called Clara again from the garage. "Clara," I whispered, "they're trying to get my doctor involved." "I figured as much," she said. "Don't panic. I'll subpoena his notes if it comes to that. But you need something stronger than your word." "Like what?" "Proof. Concrete, undeniable proof." That was when I remembered something Martin had taught me years ago. When people lie, he'd said, they always leave receipts. You just have to look where they don't expect you to. So I did. I began searching the house whenever they were gone. Drawers, cabinets, even the trash. I found shredded papers with partial account numbers, duplicate credit card statements, and emails printed and left in the study. One line stood out from a message Nicholas had sent to a financial advisor. Once Mom's evaluation is finalized, we can move forward with refinancing the property under our names. Our names. That was the confirmation I needed. I photographed everything with my phone, encrypted it, and uploaded copies to a private drive Clara had helped me set up. Each night I lay awake in the dark, rehearsing my next move. My heart still broke at the thought that my own son had become a stranger, but grief had given way to clarity. They wanted to take everything I had built. What they didn't know was that I was already 3 steps ahead, just like I'd been in every audit of my life. And if they wanted a performance of insanity, I was ready to give them one. The day everything became crystal clear started like any other. Sunlight poured through the kitchen blinds, the smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and Vanessa's heels clicked across the marble floor like the ticking of a clock I was learning to despise. She placed a folder on the counter. "Mom," she said in that polished, sugar-sweet tone, "Nick and I are meeting with a lawyer today. We just need you to look over these forms before we go." I dried my hands on a towel and looked down. The folder was labeled Harper Family Trust Agreement. My name appeared under a section titled Grantor's Signatory Authorization. I lifted my gaze slowly. And what exactly am I authorizing? Vanessa smiled, her lip gloss catching the light. "Oh, it's just standard paperwork. Consolidating assets, streamlining your retirement accounts, things that'll make life easier for you." My pulse thudded in my ears. "You mean easier for you?" Her smile twitched. "I don't understand what you mean." "Oh, I think you do." She blinked, her expression hardening for the briefest second before she caught herself. "You're overthinking again," she said softly, "and Nick gets so worried when you do that." She gathered the folder and walked away, her perfume lingering in the air like an invisible smirk. That evening, while they were out at a dinner party, I unlocked their office door with the thin metal nail file I kept hidden in my cardigan pocket. My hands shook, not from fear, but from adrenaline. The office smelled of cologne and printer ink. On the desk sat a laptop, open but asleep, a legal pad filled with Nicholas's sharp handwriting beside it. I scanned the words. Petition for adult guardianship, supporting medical report to be filed upon completion. My throat went dry. There it was. Their entire plan in black and white. I copied every page on my portable scanner, an old habit from my auditing days, and saved them to my hidden flash drive. Then, I clicked on the laptop trackpad. The screen came alive. An open email sat unsent, addressed to someone named Mark Givens at Maplewood Financial Partners. "Mark, once the trust is approved and the deed transferred, we'll need a 90-day turnaround on the property refinancing. Also, can you expedite the title change? My mother won't be able to sign much longer." My mother won't be able to sign much longer. The words blurred as anger swelled through my chest like a pulse. That was the moment it hit me. This wasn't just manipulation. It was a full-scale heist, orchestrated by my own son. I didn't cry. Not then. I just stared at the glowing screen and whispered, "You underestimated me, Nicholas." On my way out, something on the bookshelf caught my eye, a locked metal box. It was small, maybe the size of a lunch tin, with a digital keypad. I'd seen Nicholas use it before but never knew what was inside. My instincts told me it mattered. I crouched down and ran my fingers along the edges, feeling for any hint of wear. The code had to be something predictable. Birthdays, maybe? I tried Vanessa's, no luck. Then Nicholas's, still no. And then it clicked. Their wedding anniversary. 08-14. The box clicked open. Inside were printed financial statements, property documents, and a memory card taped to the lid. My breath caught. I pocketed the card and carefully rearranged everything before locking the box again. Back in my room, I plugged the card into my laptop. Hundreds of files appeared: photos, voice recordings, video clips. The first video nearly made me drop the laptop. It was me. In the kitchen. Confused, tired, asking, "Where's my mail?" Vanessa's voice behind the camera said, "It's right there, Evelyn. You already opened it." I hadn't. The envelope in the shot was sealed. There were dozens of similar clips, all staged, each one edited to make me look forgetful or unstable. In one, Nicholas even faked a phone call with a doctor, saying, "She's not eating right. Sometimes she forgets who I am." They were building a digital case. A mother's downfall, scripted and recorded by her own family. For a long time, I couldn't move. I just sat there, staring at the screen, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. Then, something inside me went completely still. I wasn't Evelyn the victim anymore. I was Evelyn the investigator. I catalogued every file, renamed each clip with timestamps, and backed them up to a private cloud Clara had set up for me under the alias Jane Meadows. I wrote an index, down to the second, so no one could accuse me of tampering. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking. The first streaks of light painted the sky outside my window. I poured myself coffee and smiled for the first time in weeks. When Nicholas came downstairs, rubbing his eyes, he said, "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," I replied calmly. "Just thinking about family." He smiled, oblivious. "Good thoughts, I hope." "Oh yes," I said, stirring my coffee. "Very good thoughts." That same morning, I called Clara and told her everything. She listened silently, then said, "Evelyn, what you just described is felony-level fraud, coercion, and elder abuse. We need to act carefully, but decisively." "Carefully," I repeated, glancing toward the kitchen where Vanessa hummed while making breakfast. "That's my specialty." Clara exhaled slowly. "Let them think they're winning. But from this point on, document every breath they take." And I did. For weeks. Every time Vanessa helped me balance the checkbook, I saved screenshots of the transactions. Every time Nicholas scheduled a doctor's appointment, I recorded the call. I even installed a small voice recorder inside the air vent of the dining room, hidden behind the decorative grate. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of their lies. But the truth about betrayal is that it never stays quiet for long. Sooner or later, the masks start to slip. And in their arrogance, they were about to give me the one thing I needed most: a public audience. If you ever want to watch evil unravel, give it confidence. That was the lesson I'd learned over a lifetime in accounting. The guilty always reveal themselves when they think no one's looking. So, I let Nicholas and Vanessa believe their performance was working. I played the part they wrote for me, the fragile, forgetful mother who nodded too often and questioned too little. Each harmless smile I gave them was another layer of armor. Each mistake I pretended to make was another trap I set. The following Monday, I told Nicholas that I'd had trouble sleeping. "Maybe I should let you handle the mail," I murmured, voice trembling just enough to sound believable. He smiled, relief and arrogance blooming on his face. "That's what I've been saying, Mom. You just rest. Vanessa and I will take care of everything." Perfect. That afternoon, they left for a real estate consultation, something about a new investment property. I waited 5 minutes after their car pulled out before dialing Clara. "Operation Pretend to be Crazy is going well," I whispered. She chuckled softly. You sound calm for someone in the middle of psychological warfare. I'm an accountant, Clara. I've survived budget meetings in tax season. This is nothing. We laughed, but only briefly. The stakes were far too real. Clara had already filed a quiet preemptive report with the Oregon Elder Financial Protection Office under my name, classifying my situation as suspected undue influence. It was a safeguard, a legal timestamp proving I had reached out before Nicholas and Vanessa's inevitable claim of incompetency. She also suggested we begin building a paper trail that would lead directly to them. If they think you're weak, they'll start moving money faster, she said. We'll follow the trail legally. And she was right. Within 2 weeks, suspicious withdrawals started showing up again, this time from my secondary savings account. Small amounts at first, $300 here, $500 there. Then, one day, a $5,000 transfer labeled home renovations, Harper Property. There were no renovations. I smiled quietly to myself. The web was tightening. To keep their confidence high, I staged a few small episodes. Once, I pretended to forget my purse at the grocery store. Another time, I misplaced my phone and asked Vanessa to help me find it, while Clara remotely accessed my call logs from her office to verify unauthorized banking activity. Vanessa began recording me more frequently, her tone dripping with exaggerated sympathy. Don't worry, Evelyn. Everyone forgets things sometimes. Sometimes I caught her eye through the phone camera and smiled a little too long. I think part of her wondered if I knew. But arrogance is a powerful drug. Nicholas was more mechanical, clinical even. He'd sit with me at dinner, asking questions like, "Mom, do you remember what day it is?" Sometimes I'd answer wrong on purpose. Other times I'd pause, smile and say, "Do you?" That always unnerved him. He'd blink, laugh awkwardly, and change the subject. By now, Clara and I had built an entire digital archive, hundreds of photos, recordings, documents, and screenshots neatly catalogued and timestamped. We weren't just preparing for a confrontation, we were building a legal fortress. But I wanted something more. Something poetic. They had humiliated me in front of their friends, called me adorable, fragile, a bit lost these days. I wanted the world to see the truth with the same clarity I had. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. One morning, while Vanessa was leaving for her yoga class, she took a call on speakerphone. I was in the hallway dusting a framed photo when I heard a man's voice say, "Once you transfer the title, you'll get a commission bonus, Mrs. Harper. But remember, the bank needs confirmation that she's mentally unfit before the refinance." Vanessa's tone turned brisk. "Don't worry. Nick's handling the medical part. The doctor's report will be ready next week." I froze. They were getting paid. They weren't just stealing my property, they were profiting from it. I went to my room and immediately wrote everything down. Time, date, exact words. Then I opened my hidden recorder app and whispered the details again. Vanessa phone call, 9:17 a.m., refinance commission confirmed. Later that night, when Nicholas came home, I decided to test him. "Nick," I said, keeping my tone light, "I was thinking about that refinance thing you mentioned. Maybe I should be more involved." He smiled, the kind of smile you give a child asking for a cookie before dinner. "Mom, please. That's too complicated for you. It's all under control." "I know," I said. "I just don't want you working too hard." He laughed. "You're sweet." And just like that, he confessed without realizing it, because people always do when they think they're smarter than you. That evening, I transferred the latest batch of evidence to Clara's private legal server. When she called, her voice was calm but firm. "Evelyn, we have enough to crush them in court. But I think you deserve something bigger than a courtroom." "What do you mean?" I mean public. A statement. A moment where they can't twist the narrative. Somewhere everyone will see who they really are. I thought about it for a long time. Then, a slow smile crept across my face. The gala, I said. The Maplewood Community Honors Gala. They're presenting Nick with that Young Entrepreneur Award, aren't they? Clara hesitated. You want to confront them there? No, I said softly. I want to expose them there. We planned for weeks. Every document printed, every recording cued, every legal file notarized and ready. Clara worked with a private investigator to secure the right clearances in case things escalated publicly. Meanwhile, I continued pretending, frilier by the day, slower in speech, weaker in spirit. At dinner one night, Nicholas said to Vanessa, "She's practically ready for the evaluation. Another week and it's over." Vanessa poured wine, smiling. We did it, baby. I kept my eyes on my plate and said quietly, "Yes, you did." In the reflection of my glass, I saw Clara's text flash on my phone screen. Everything is ready. See you at the gala. They thought they were about to win. They didn't realize the game had already ended. The Maplewood Community Honors Gala was the most anticipated event of the year. Every local business owner, politician, and socialite in town showed up in their best attire to celebrate integrity and leadership. I almost laughed when I saw the words printed across the invitation that Vanessa proudly handed me. "Nick's being honored this year," she said, smiling as if she'd won the lottery. "Isn't that wonderful, Mom? The committee recognized how dedicated he's been, especially to you." "To me?" I repeated. "Of course," she said smoothly. "They're giving him the Family Values Award. Isn't that just perfect?" It took everything in me not to laugh out loud. The irony was delicious. I looked at her for a long moment before replying. "Yes," I said finally. "Perfect." They didn't realize that this gala, the one they saw as their crowning moment, was about to become their public undoing. The night of the event, the Maplewood Convention Hall shimmered under warm golden lights. The chandeliers glowed like captured stars, and a live jazz band played soft melodies while waiters in black suits floated across the room carrying champagne. The place was filled with laughter, camera flashes, and polite lies. I arrived wearing a soft gray dress that Martin had always loved. Simple, understated, but dignified. Vanessa, on the other hand, looked like she was auditioning for a royal coronation. Sequins, diamonds, the works. Nicholas wore his favorite tailored suit, the one he'd bought with my money. As soon as I entered, people began approaching me with sympathy-filled smiles. "Oh, Mrs. Harper, you must be so proud of your son," one woman said. "He talks so lovingly about taking care of you." I forced a polite smile. "Yes," I said, "he's been very attentive." Every phrase, every compliment, every shallow handshake, it was all part of their illusion. They had spent months painting me as the sweet, fading old woman and themselves as the selfless caretakers. They donated to local charities in my name, given interviews about raising awareness for elder care, and even convinced the community that I'd grown too fragile to attend public events. Tonight, they wanted the world to see their triumph. What they didn't know was that the world was about to see the truth. At exactly 8:15 p.m., the host, a tall man with too much enthusiasm, took the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he boomed into the microphone, "please welcome our next honoree, Mr. Nicholas Harper, recipient of the Family Values Award for his outstanding devotion and compassion toward his mother, Mrs. Evelyn Harper." Applause erupted around the room. I watched my son walk up to the podium, smiling, confident, handsome, the perfect mask. He began his speech. "Thank you, everyone," he said warmly. "This means so much to me and Vanessa. Caring for my mother has been one of the greatest blessings of my life. Watching her grow older has taught me patience, empathy, and that's when I stood up. At first, no one noticed. But as I began walking toward the stage, heads started to turn. The soft murmur of conversation turned into silence. "Mom." Nicholas's voice faltered slightly. "Mom, what are you doing?" I reached the steps and looked up at him. My voice, though calm, carried through every corner of that glittering hall. "I think it's time I said a few words too, sweetheart." The host hesitated, unsure, but I gently took the microphone from Nicholas's hand. The lights were bright and hot, but I stood tall, steady. "Good evening," I began. "I'm Evelyn Harper. Some of you know me as Nick's mother. Many of you have heard wonderful stories about how devoted he and Vanessa have been to my well-being." I paused. "You've heard that I'm forgetful, that I'm confused, that I'm incapable of handling my own affairs." A few people nodded awkwardly, unsure where I was going. "Well," I said, "I'd like to tell you what they forgot to mention." From my purse, I pulled out a small black flash drive. Clara was already in position near the sound booth at the back of the hall. She gave me a discreet nod. I continued, "For months, my son and his wife have been recording me without consent. Staging incidents to make me appear unstable. Filing legal documents behind my back to take control of my finances, my home, and my freedom." A ripple of whispers swept through the crowd. Nicholas's smile had vanished. Vanessa's face turned rigid, her glass of champagne trembling slightly in her hand. "Let me show you," I said. Clara clicked a button on her laptop. The massive projection screen behind the stage flickered to life. The first video appeared, the one where Vanessa filmed me searching for mail that had never been opened. "See?" Vanessa's voice echoed through the speakers. "She forgets everything these days." Then the next clip, Nicholas faking a phone call with my doctor. "She's not eating right," his recorded voice said. "Sometimes she doesn't even remember who I am." Gasps filled the room. The final clip played, a recording from the air vent camera I had hidden weeks ago. Vanessa's voice, low and unmistakable, said, "Once she's declared incompetent, the property's ours. The bank's ready to sign as soon as the doctor finalizes the report." Then Nicholas's voice replied, "She won't even know it happened." When the video ended, the silence was absolute. Even the jazz band had stopped playing. Nicholas stammered, "Mom, this isn't what, Nicholas?" I asked quietly, "The truth." Vanessa took a step forward. You must have edited those." Before she could finish, Clara stood up, holding a stack of notarized documents. "Everything you just saw is authenticated and timestamped," she said firmly. "All verified by state investigators." The crowd erupted, some in disbelief, others in outrage. The mayor, who had been sitting near the front, looked mortified. The host lowered his head. The spotlight still burned on Nicholas, whose face had gone pale as chalk. I turned to him one last time. "You told people I was crazy," I said softly. "You almost made me believe it. But I remembered every word, every lie, every dollar you took. And tonight, I'm the one keeping the receipts." Then I handed the microphone back and walked off stage. Behind me, I could hear Vanessa whispering frantically to Nicholas, reporters shouting questions, and cameras flashing like lightning. Clara met me near the exit, her expression steady but proud. "It's done," she said. "Yes," I replied, exhaling slowly. "But it's not over yet." The night after the gala, Maplewood was buzzing like a hive torn open. Clips from the event flooded social media. Shaky phone videos of me standing on stage, Nicholas's frozen expression under the bright lights, Vanessa's trembling hands clutching her wine glass. By morning, it wasn't just gossip, it was news. Local businessman accused of defrauding his elderly mother. Evelyn Harper's stunning revelation shocks Maplewood Gala. Community hero or family villain? The Harper scandal unfolds. By 8 a.m., reporters were parked across the street from my house. Neighbors peeked from their windows, whispering behind half-closed blinds. For years, they'd waved politely, believing the version of me Nicholas and Vanessa had crafted, the confused, fragile woman who needed supervision. Now they saw something else, a mother who'd fought back. Clara arrived that morning, her briefcase packed with documents, her face set in the calm expression I'd come to recognize, the look of a professional who knows justice is finally catching up. "They're scrambling," she said, setting her papers on the dining table. "Nicholas's company board suspended him until the investigation is over. Vanessa's brokerage license is under review. That commission deal you caught on the recording was enough to trigger an ethics violation." I sipped my tea, feeling neither joy nor relief, only a deep, steady quiet. They never thought it would go public. Clara smiled faintly. "They thought you wouldn't survive it. But you didn't just survive, Evelyn. You flipped the narrative. Now we secure the rest." We spent the next few days gathering everything, not just to defend myself, but to make sure no one could ever question what happened. Every email, every transaction, every staged video, printed, notarized, and archived in both digital and physical copies. Clara had already filed an official elder financial abuse complaint with the state's Department of Justice, backed by my meticulously organized evidence. She laid out the next steps in calm, precise tones. Civil lawsuit for damages and restitution, to reclaim every cent they took. Criminal charges, fraud, coercion, and unlawful surveillance. Property recovery order, to secure my deed and block any pending transfers. When she finished, she looked up at me. "You've done most of the work already. All that's left now is the follow-through." I smiled faintly. "I learned from the best. You once told me patience wins wars." Clara laughed softly. "I said patience wins cases, Evelyn. But tonight, I'll make an exception." Later that afternoon, I walked through the house, every step echoing in the silence they'd once filled with cruelty and deceit. Their laughter, their taunts, their whispered plans, gone now. Replaced by something they couldn't fake anymore, accountability. In the living room, I paused at the window. Across the street, the Johnsons were talking to a reporter, shaking their heads in disbelief. I knew what they were saying. "We had no idea," they'd insist. "Nick always seemed like such a good son." They didn't need to know the rest, the long nights of humiliation, the staged confusion, the way Vanessa would sigh when I took too long to count change at the store. That part wasn't for them. That was for me to remember. Not as pain, but as proof. That evening, the doorbell rang. It was Tony, the neighbor's son, a quiet, kind young man who often helped me carry groceries. He looked nervous, holding a stack of newspapers. "Mrs. Harper," he said, "I thought you might want these." He handed me the papers, each one showing a headline about the gala. "Thank you, Tony," I said softly. He hesitated, then added, "My mom says you're brave." "Everyone does," she said. "She said you reminded her of her own mom." I smiled, feeling something warm stir in my chest. "Tell her thank you. And tell her I'm finally remembering who I am." He grinned and nodded before leaving. When I closed the door, I realized the fear that had lived inside me for years, the fear of being alone, of being silenced, was gone. They had built their power on my silence. Once I broke it, everything else crumbled. 2 days later, Clara called with an update. "The prosecutor's office has accepted the case," she said. "They'll file charges by next week. It's happening, Evelyn. The system's moving." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting it sink in. Will they go to jail? It's likely, she replied. But even if they don't, their reputations are finished. No employer will touch them again. And the restitution order will ensure they pay back every dollar. I looked around at the house that had been mine long before Nicholas was even born. You know, I said quietly, I used to pray every night that they'd just stop hurting me. Now I realize. Sometimes God doesn't stop the storm. He teaches you how to stand in it. Clara didn't say anything for a while. Then, softly, that's exactly what you did. That night, I sat by the fireplace, the room bathed in amber light. On the mantel sat the original deed, my name printed clearly, legally, permanently. Beneath it lay a small envelope Clara had given me earlier, the final court notice confirming that all my assets were secure, every fraudulent claim voided. I poured myself a cup of tea and whispered to the quiet room, "We did it, Martin." For the first time in years, I felt free, not just from their control, but from the weight of doubt they'd planted in my mind. I'd been called crazy, forgetful, fragile. But I'd outsmarted them all. And as the fire crackled softly, I realized something else. Silence wasn't weakness. Sometimes, silence was strategy. The hearing was scheduled 3 weeks after the gala. I wore a simple navy dress and a strand of pearls that had belonged to my mother. Nothing flashy, just enough to remind myself that dignity doesn't need decoration. When I arrived at the courthouse, the air was cold and sharp, heavy with tension and whispered curiosity. People recognized me from the news, nodding politely as I passed. Some offered quiet smiles of support. Others just stared, as if still trying to understand how the story of the helpless old widow had turned into one of Maplewood's biggest scandals. Nicholas and Vanessa were already seated at the defendant's table when I entered. He looked pale, thinner than before. She looked furious, her usual glossed perfection replaced by dark circles and trembling hands. I could almost feel their fear, not of me, but of losing everything they'd built on my back. Across the aisle sat Clara, composed and unflinching. She gave me a small nod, a silent signal that the truth was about to speak for itself. The judge, a tall woman with silver hair and clear gray eyes, opened the session briskly. This court recognizes the case of Evelyn Harper versus Nicholas Harper and Vanessa Harper. Charges of financial fraud, forgery, and elder coercion. Miss Grant, you may begin. Clara stood, her voice calm but piercing. Your Honor, this is not just a story about theft. It's about betrayal, a betrayal committed under the guise of love. Over the course of 2 years, the defendants manipulated Mrs. Harper, their own mother and mother-in-law, through deception, forged documents, and false medical claims, all to seize control of her property and savings. She clicked the remote, and the courtroom monitors came to life. One by one, the recordings played, the same ones from the gala, now supported by notarized timestamps and forensic authentication. Every whisper, every cruel joke, every word of deceit echoed through the courtroom. Vanessa looked down at her lap. Nicholas tried to interrupt once, but the judge silenced him with a single glare. Then came the documents, the fake guardianship forms, the falsified notary stamp, the fabricated medical report, all signed in Nicholas's handwriting. By the time Clara finished, there was nothing left to defend. The judge leaned back, folding her hands. Mrs. Harper, would you like to address the court before sentencing? I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. Your Honor, I began, for 30 years I worked as a financial auditor. I built my life around honesty, discipline, and fairness. When my husband passed, I thought I'd done my job as a mother, raising a son who would carry those values forward. Instead, I raised someone who learned how to weaponize them. I turned toward Nicholas. You told people I was weak. You made me doubt my own mind. You took the love I gave you and turned it into leverage. But you forgot the most important lesson your father ever taught you, Integrity is the only inheritance worth having. Nicholas lowered his head. I looked at Vanessa next. And you turned my home into a prison of polite cruelty. Every smile was a lie. Every kindness, a trap. You thought age made me irrelevant. But you were wrong. Age made me dangerous, because I've seen how people like you operate. The judge nodded solemnly. Thank you, Mrs. Harper. She turned to the defendants. Nicholas and Vanessa Harper, you are hereby found guilty of financial exploitation, falsification of legal documents, and undue coercion. Sentenced to 18 months of house arrest, full restitution of $120,000, and 500 hours of community service at the Maplewood Senior Resource Center. The sound of the gavel striking wood was like thunder breaking the air. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered. Reporters called my name, microphones thrust forward, flashes exploding like fireworks. I held my head high. Mrs. Harper, how does it feel to see justice served? One asked. It feels, I said quietly, like breathing again. Clara smiled beside me. That's your statement for the evening news, she whispered. The days that followed were strange, peaceful, yet surreal. The house felt lighter, as if it had finally exhaled. Neighbors began visiting again, bringing casseroles, flowers, and stories of their own. Some confessed they'd suspected something was wrong but hadn't known how to help. I didn't blame them. Most people don't see manipulation until it's too late. One evening, I received a letter, handwritten, trembling. It was from Nicholas. Mom, I know sorry isn't enough. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know that I see it now, all of it. What I did, what Vanessa did. You were right about everything. I hope one day, when I've paid for what I've done, I can become the kind of person you raised me to be. Love, Nick. I folded the letter carefully and placed it inside my old ledger, the one I used to balance accounts after Martin died. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was closure. Months passed. Seasons changed. And slowly so did I. The town invited me to speak at a local community event, Protecting Our Elders, a conversation on financial awareness. I stood on that stage under the same lights that had once illuminated my humiliation and spoke to a new crowd, one that listened, learned, and applauded. I'm not here because I was strong, I told them. I'm here because I refused to stay silent. You don't have to wear a uniform or carry a badge to fight for justice. Sometimes all it takes is keeping your receipts, and knowing when to speak. The applause that followed wasn't loud, it was steady. It sounded like healing. That night, I sat on my porch as the sun sank behind Maplewood's hills. The sky was gold, the same color as Martin's old wedding band, which I still wore on my right hand. Clara called to check in, as she always did. How are you holding up, Evelyn? I'm good, I said. For the first time in years, I think I'm really living again. She laughed. You've earned that. After hanging up, I looked out at the quiet street and whispered to the air, some wars are fought in silence. Some victories happen in plain sight. But the sweetest ones, I smiled, closing my eyes, are the ones they never see coming. By the time spring rolled into Maplewood, the frost of scandal had melted, leaving behind something unexpected, peace. Real, tangible peace. The kind I hadn't felt in years. The flowers in the front yard that Vanessa once called old lady plants were in full bloom again. The lilacs I'd planted with Martin 30 years ago had spread across the fence line, thick and fragrant. Every morning, when I opened my curtains, sunlight spilled over them like a blessing. For the first time in a long while, I could look around my house and see it for what it truly was, mine. My home. My sanctuary. Clara called it my second chapter. She said survivors often struggle to know what to do once justice is served. "You've been in defense mode for so long," she told me. "It's time to start dreaming again." Dreaming. I'd forgotten how. But slowly, the idea began to take root. I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to help others who couldn't yet find their voice. One afternoon, while sorting through paperwork for the community center, I came across a letter from the Oregon Senior Advocacy Foundation. They were launching a new outreach program for victims of family exploitation, financial, emotional, or otherwise. They wanted me to join the board. At first, I hesitated. The word victim still felt heavy on my tongue. But then I realized, I wasn't joining as a victim. I was joining as a warning, a survivor, and a teacher. The following month, I attended my first meeting. The conference room was filled with women and men from all walks of life. Retired teachers, widowers, even a former police officer, all with stories that mirrored mine in quiet, devastating ways. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and simply said, "I'm Evelyn Harper, and I know what it's like to be erased by the people you love. But I also know what it's like to write yourself back into your own story." The room went still. And then, people began to clap. That was the moment I realized, my life wasn't ending in bitterness. It was beginning in purpose. With Clara's help, I turned the restitution money the court awarded me into something that mattered. We founded the Harper Integrity Initiative, a local grant program that provided free legal consultations to elderly citizens facing manipulation or abuse from family members. The first year, we helped 12 families. By the next, there were 50. Some cried in my arms after regaining access to their homes. Others sent letters with trembling handwriting that said, "You gave me back my name." Every single one reminded me of what I'd nearly lost. Not my money, but my sense of worth. Nicholas never contacted me directly again. I received updates through Clara. He'd completed his community service quietly, working at the very senior center I now helped fund. I heard that he'd been humble, withdrawn, polite to the residents. Maybe remorse had finally found him. Vanessa, however, filed for divorce 6 months later. Her brokerage license was permanently revoked. Last I heard, she'd moved back to her parents' home in Seattle. The irony was poetic. The woman who once mocked me for being old-fashioned now lived off her mother's savings. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I simply accepted it. Some lessons are meant to sting before they heal. One evening, while hosting a workshop at the community hall, a woman named Linda approached me. Her eyes were red from crying. "My daughter's been taking my disability checks," she said quietly. "She says it's for my own good. I didn't think I could tell anyone, but then I watched your story online." I reached for her hand. "You just did the hardest part," I said gently. "You spoke it out loud. Now we'll do the rest together." Helping her, and others like her, became my new purpose. Months later, on my 75th birthday, Clara and a few friends surprised me with a small gathering at my home. The air smelled of vanilla cake and candle wax. There were no headlines, no flashbulbs, no deceit, just laughter and warmth. At one point, Clara raised a glass. "To Evelyn Harper," she said. "Proof that strength doesn't retire, it only grows wiser." Everyone clapped, and for the first time, I didn't shy away from the attention. I smiled, truly smiled, and felt something deep in my chest loosen. Later that night, after everyone left, I stepped out to the porch with a cup of tea. The moon hung low and bright over the lilac bushes. The wind rustled softly, carrying the scent of spring and renewal. I thought about the woman I had been, small, frightened, manipulated, and the woman I'd become. The world had called me weak. But I'd learned that gentleness and strength weren't opposites. They were partners. And that's when I understood, forgiveness wasn't about them. It was about freeing myself from their shadow. So, I whispered into the cool night, "I forgive you, Nicholas. Not for you but for me. The words floated into the dark, light as breath. Weeks later, a letter arrived, not from my son this time, but from a woman named Margaret, whose husband had fallen victim to his own daughter's manipulation. Dear Mrs. Harper, because of your foundation, my husband got his savings back. We thought we were alone until we saw your interview. You've given hope to people who thought silence was their only option. Thank you. I placed the letter in a small box I kept on my nightstand, right next to Martin's wedding ring and the deed to the house. Proof of every battle, every victory, every second chance. That night, I dreamed of a quiet beach, waves rolling over soft sand. In the dream, I saw Martin standing by the shore, smiling. You did it, he said. And for the first time, I believed him. When I woke up, morning light poured through the window. The house was filled with the smell of lilacs. The world outside was alive and waiting. I poured myself a cup of coffee, stood by the window, and whispered to my reflection, "You're home, Evelyn. You made it." By the time the next autumn came, Maplewood had changed, and so had I. The whispers that once followed my name had turned into words of respect. People no longer saw a fragile old widow but a woman who refused to disappear quietly. The Harper Integrity Initiative had grown far beyond anything Clara or I had imagined. We now had offices in 3 nearby towns and a hotline that rang every single day with stories that broke my heart and reminded me why I had fought so hard. One afternoon, I sat in the office reviewing letters from families we'd helped when a young volunteer named Anna peeked her head in. She couldn't have been more than 22, bright, curious eyes, eager to change the world. "Mrs. Harper," she said shyly, "someone left this for you at the front desk." She handed me a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a worn leather journal. My breath caught when I saw the initials embossed in gold on the cover, NH. I hesitated before opening it. On the first page, written in the same neat handwriting I had memorized decades ago, were the words, "Mom, this belonged to me once, but it's yours now." Inside are letters I wrote during the last year. Things I never said, things I didn't understand then but do now. I don't expect you to read them all. Just know that I've been trying to make amends the only way I know how. I've started volunteering at the Veterans Home. It's humbling. Every time I help one of them balance their finances or talk to their families, I think of you. I think about what you taught me, that real integrity doesn't need applause. It just needs courage. You showed me that. I'm sorry it took losing everything to see it. Love, always, Nick. For a long time, I couldn't move. My fingers trembled as I turned each page. Paragraphs filled with remorse, self-reflection, even gratitude. I closed the journal and pressed it against my heart. The ache I'd carried for so long softened, not into forgiveness exactly, but into peace. A quiet understanding that sometimes redemption comes not in grand gestures, but in the small, unseen steps a person takes to rebuild what they broke. That evening, Clara and I met for dinner at our favorite little cafe downtown. The same one where we'd planned my revenge months ago. The walls were covered in autumn leaves and soft yellow lights. She looked across the table at me with that knowing smile. "You seem lighter," she said. I smiled back. Maybe because I am. We toasted with tea instead of wine. "To second chances," she said. "To choosing yourself," I replied. Outside, the town square buzzed with families preparing for the annual harvest festival. Children ran past holding caramel apples and cotton candy, laughter echoing against the crisp night air. For the first time, I wanted to stay and watch instead of going home early. So we did. We stayed until the lights dimmed and the stars began to show. A few weeks later, the local newspaper ran a feature titled, "The Woman Who Changed the Rules, Evelyn Harper's Fight for Dignity Sparks Statewide Reform." It detailed how our advocacy initiative had helped inspire a new bill protecting elderly citizens from financial guardianship abuse, the Evelyn Harper Protection Act. When Clara called to tell me, I sat in stunned silence. My name, the one they once used to humiliate me, now stood for something bigger, something untouchable. Months passed. The foundation continued to grow. We launched free seminars across Oregon, teaching seniors how to identify manipulation, how to keep their finances safe, and most importantly, how to believe that their voices still mattered. I became something I never thought I would again, a mentor. Not because I was fearless, but because I knew what fear felt like and refused to let others drown in it. On my 76th birthday, the community center threw me a small surprise gathering. The staff had decorated the hall with lavender and gold, my favorite colors. A group of children from the local elementary school performed a little skit about honesty and courage. I laughed until I cried. Afterward, Anna, the young volunteer, handed me a microphone. "Mrs. Harper," she said, "would you say a few words? You've inspired so many of us." I took a deep breath and looked around at the faces smiling back at me, people of every age, race, and story. "Life has a funny way of testing us," I began. "It breaks you in all the places where light is meant to enter. And when you think you've lost everything, that's when you find the truth about who you are. I was betrayed by my own family. But I learned that family isn't always the people who share your blood. Sometimes, it's the ones who hold your hand when the world walks away. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: silence only protects the guilty. Speak, even if your voice trembles. Because the moment you speak, you take your power back." The applause that followed filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. That night, I sat by my fireplace again, the same place where this story began, but everything felt different. The house was no longer a reminder of pain. It was a monument to survival. On the mantel, beside Martin's photograph, stood a new frame, a picture of me, Clara, and Anna at the foundation's ribbon-cutting ceremony. Beneath it was a small plaque that read, "For every woman told she's too old, too weak, or too late, this one's for you." I smiled softly, letting the firelight dance across the walls. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window, steady and soothing. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Not forgiveness, not justice, not closure. I had all three. As the clock ticked quietly toward midnight, I whispered into the warm glow of the room, "I kept my receipts, and I kept my soul." And in the end, that's all that ever mattered.